Hi, today we're here with Jurgen Appelo. How are you, Jurgen?
I am doing well, Tony. Thank you.
Absolutely brilliant. What I'd like to do is just for you to introduce yourself to everyone. Not everyone will know you, so that'd be fantastic. You let people know a little bit your rich history.
I call myself an author, speaker, and entrepreneur in that order. So primarily, I love writing books. The first one that I am sort of well known for in the Agile community is Management 3.0, about the role of the leader in the Agile organization, because I happened to be a manager at that time, and I thought that was an underappreciated and underrepresented role in an Agile context. And I wrote a couple more books since then, Managing for Happiness and Startup, Scale Up, Screw Up. I also like speaking at conferences. To be honest, there haven't been many conferences in the last 2 years. Lots of webinars, though.
Yeah.
As I said earlier today, I do entrepreneuring on the side because I love being an entrepreneur, and I'm not claiming to be really good at it, but I have a couple of successes and many failures to share, of course. Yeah, that's a bit of my background.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, Management 3.0, I guess we'll address that one first, because as you said, you're pretty well known for Management 3.0, and I won't lie to you, it's certainly influenced many of the things that we've thought about when we were doing the remote agility framework and talking about, it has influenced that whole delegation of leadership now. I think before the lightning rod of COVID threw us all into this hybrid remote thing, there was leadership was an issue to start with, but it has been exacerbated by this. And I think Management 3.0 has a piece to play in that. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, as I said, I felt at the time that the role of the manager was underappreciated and underrepresented. I mean, for good reasons, because originally the focus was on software development. For sure, I understood that, and I was a software developer. I was a manager of a number of software teams. So the original focus in the first phase was on how do we have those teams do a greater job making customers happy. But they soon realized that you cannot do that without changing the rest of the organization. And then you will run up the management walls, basically. I think managers have an important role to play. And I found it a bit naive in certain circles where they said, well, let's just get rid of all the managers. There are two problems with that. First is it doesn't work. And the second is it doesn't sell. So it doesn't work from a theoretical perspective. You may remember that I have a lot of references to complexity science in my book. And from science, I learned there is no self-organization without constraints. When there are no constraints, nothing will self-organize. Well, guess who is responsible for the constraints? Management. Management puts constraints in place, and then within that environment that should be created by management, you could have a wonderful garden growing and becoming beautiful. So that's I love the gardener metaphor that I also used in Management 3.0. That's the role of the manager, to be the gardener of that self-organizing environment. But also, it doesn't sell well. I mean, if you go in and try to begin an agile transformation, the first thing managers want to know, who are paying the invoices usually, what's in it for me? And if you say, well, we're gonna have you quit your job, that's not the best way to introduce a new way of working. So you have to give them a place and give them something to do. So it doesn't work, it doesn't sell if you do not explain what managers are supposed to do in a new agile environment.
Yeah, and you see that so often, like over the 20 years I've been doing this, you see this so often, particularly with consultancies now getting their hands on agility and rolling out the, shall we say, cookie cutter type models. It leaves the leadership wanting and asking, well, where is my place in this, let alone if they haven't already been told that they're not existing anymore. So I think that 3.0 has had a wonderful job to play in that, in bringing that back to the fore. But also reinventing it in a way. So enabling them to understand this is how you lead in an agile way, and this is how you
Exactly.
enable your people.
Exactly. And don't get me wrong, I fully understand that in many organizations there are too many managers for historical reasons. The middle management layer had become bloated, full of people who do not add much value. I have seen it myself, and actually, quite a few of those people would rather do something else if there was another way to make a career. But in traditional organizations, that was the only way to make a career was to be moved into a management position. Well, if you have an alternative for them, they would often be happy to take it as long as they feel they make progress as a human being, that they matter, that they make an important contribution, and that the line is going up in their life, so to speak. So you need to have an explanation of what happens with the management role. We're not going to fire all the managers. That makes no sense. Some managers still have an important role to play. And yes, some will have to do something else. And you need to explain that, what that something else is. And yeah, I find that a fascinating topic.
Yeah, and I'll just touch on one last bit because I don't want to spend the whole lot on 3.0. We could, but I think that as I said before, with the change to remote, I think I was talking to someone just this afternoon around that is that move to that remote, and we're all on cameras, and it's been very hard for the leaders, and I don't think that's been acknowledged as much as it should be. That leadership's taken a real hit in understanding how they have to change their leadership now that people aren't close by. And many of the things that you have in 3.0 actually enable that for them.
Yeah, it's interesting. I listened to a podcast just yesterday about an HR manager in the US explaining how things have changed because of COVID and people working from home, and how this has accelerated the thinking that you cannot measure performance anymore by the number of hours people have been sitting on their chair behind their desk. And I thought, well, hooray, we have been trying to explain that for 10 years or more, that you should not measure people's performance by their presence and or the number of keystrokes they do on their computer. So in that sense, maybe it's a blessing in disguise that managers who were reluctant to admit this, or maybe even didn't believe it, they are now forced to recognize that there is a need to change the way we evaluate how well people are doing in organizations. Because yeah, we still need to know, is someone making a good contribution or not, or is it better that they work in another place, in another area in the company, in another role, or whatever, at another company perhaps. You need to know as a manager, but just watching people supposedly being active on their computers at their desk, that doesn't count anymore. So I see it as progress. It is companies have been pushed to the future, sometimes reluctantly and maybe even screaming and resisting, but there is no way back, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's brilliant. I might sort of segue a little to the right now and talk about one of your other books, because I quite like the Startup, Scale Up, Screw Up book of yours. I think it's 42 tools to accelerate your lean agile. We'll talk about that a little bit, because I love the whole thing about screw up, right?
Right.
We've talked about this. We've talked about, it's probably one of the worst terms I've ever heard. Is we hear this safe to fail thing all the time, but I like the way you flip around it. It's fail safely. So
Yeah.
talk about that a little bit for me.
Yeah, so well, the story behind it is the publisher wanted a new book, They said the previous one sold well, apparently. So they said, "Hey, do you have anything else up your sleeve?" And I said, "I'm too busy. I'm working on a startup, and I had things going on." And they said, "Please, please, pretty please, always good if if that happens." And then I said, "Well, then I should write a book about what I'm doing now, because then it's useful for me in my current role as a startup founder, as someone who's trying to launch a new business, get something off the ground. So let's make a book about startups." And I said, scaling up is a big thing in the agile world. So startup scale up, and then me being an author, good things come in three. I had something to come after that, and I thought, hey, screw up, uh, startup scale up, screw up. That sounds cool. Talking about failures. And then I had a discussion with the publisher back and forth, because they didn't like the word screw up at the end.
Yeah.
They said nobody's going to buy a book that ends with screw ups. And I said, I think my audience is smarter than that. I know my audience. They will like this title, believe me. Well, actually, I did research. I did an A/B test on my mailing list to see what title scored best, because the publisher wanted startup, screw up, scale up. They wanted the word in the middle. And I said, that doesn't make any sense at all, because businesses are born, they grow up, and they die. It's a natural life cycle. You don't die in the middle. I cannot explain that in in my book. So that's the anecdote behind the title. But in a concrete sense, yes, I started, but I wrote mainly about the startup stuff and a little bit about the scale up, and of course many things that could go wrong with businesses, but also this idea that there is this natural life cycle of business models and products, that I actually uh, came across as a concept because of my conversations with startups and scale ups around Europe, because I did quite a bit of traveling at that time. And I visited many famous European scale ups, such as Zalando and Booking.com and Spotify and Wise, TransferWise, they were still called at the time. And I noticed they think in terms of stages, or the life cycle stages of startups. Like you have your informal investor stage, the seed stage, and then the funding stages. They have their names, but they're also stages in the life cycle, the maturity of the business model, basically, until they scale up and then they're profitable. And after a while, all businesses die. Every business model has an expiration date, basically. And that's a very natural thing to happen. And these life cycle stages, they became a central idea in the book, as you have seen when you've read it. And I also think that distinguishes my work, and we could segue into my current work in a moment. But that distinguishes what I'm doing from others out there with agile frameworks, because there's always this focus on the product. And the product has no beginning and an end. It's like we have to keep innovating with this product. Somehow magically the product came into being out of nowhere in the agile community. We have the product, ta-da, it's there, and and then we have to keep it alive and innovate for as long as we can. And I say, well, there are actually things happening before and after. The
Yes.
product is one part of a business that is trying to stay alive by launching new products, nurturing them, having them grow up, seeing them become mature, then getting older and dying. But by that time, you have a younger generation of products. And this is exactly how it works at Apple, at Tesla, whatever. I was at Rovio in Helsinki, the makers of Angry Birds. They have this at a super fast scale. Like they have games going through this cycle within months or less than 1 or 2 years of starting up, scaling up, and then at some point screwing up, and they will be replaced by the next game. This is very normal for that company to have this endless stream of new games coming out. And at a longer scale, all companies have to deal with that. You have business models being born, they grow up, and they die at some point, and you need to be prepared for that. So that's the scale that I try to look at, and I don't really recognize that in other frameworks and methods, to be honest.
No, I thought it was quite unique. Yeah, it's really that build it, love it, support it, destroy it, right? So, and for me, that cycle is continuous within every organization. So I think they hit a note with me. So, and if anybody's listening to this, I heartily recommend go and have a read of that. That does segue. You did mention a little bit there. So when we were speaking, and I asked you to come on to the cast today, you said yes, I'm happy to do that if I can talk about my new project. So you've got to surprise me. I don't know what it is. What's the new thing that Jurgen's working on?
Well, the new thing, it's called the Unfixed Model, and it emerged maybe a bit spontaneously because things started clicking in my head. Things came together. It took me, as I once wrote, it took me 12 years of having things brewing in the back of my head, basically, and absorbing and collecting ideas from various sources. I'm not happy with the pictures as they are painted by Safe, Less, Holacracy, Spotify model, etc. But I do recognize that pictures sell. This is exactly what managers, consultants, etc. love to use as a starting point for agile transformation, something to look at and say, look, these people could then be over there and I would be over there, etc., etc. It gives you a tool for a conversation. And I thought, I want a better picture. And using the things that I had gathered at that time, I thought, I'm going to make that new picture. And that's what I have done. And it is called the Unfixed Model. And it has no new ideas in the sense that I haven't invented anything myself. It is the collection that is new. It is how I brought it together that is the new thing, but the individual elements all exist elsewhere. So, for example, I've been inspired by team topologies, by Matthew Skelton and Manuel Pais. Great work that they have done, recognizing the 4 different kinds of teams. But I saw that they miss a couple of things. They did, again, not address management. Where do you put management? They are not in one of those teams. They are somewhere else. So I made something for that. I also recognize the need for a shift from product to experience. And this is something that the Agile community, in my opinion, is not used to yet. There's a lot of focus on product backlog, product ownership, product management, product roadmaps, product. But where's the experience for the customer? As a customer, I do not care at all about the product. I care about what does the product do for me, for my experience, how does it make me happier? And one example that I often give last couple of weeks, I deleted an app from my phone, which was a perfect app for shopping, for the groceries. It was beautiful. It worked really well. Fantastic UX. I ordered 10 times. 3 times they delivered my groceries with 1 item missing. I 2 hours before they arrived, the delivery person I got a message. Sorry, we ran out of yogurt. And then I was, seriously? It means I have to go to the supermarket after all to get the yogurt? I can just as well get everything then, because you haven't saved me any time now. So the experience for me was bad. The product was good. That's the difference, right? I deleted a good product from my phone because the experience sucked. The logistics part of that company was not on par with the quality of the product. So the experience is a lot more than just the product that you're offering. It is logistics, it's finance, it's marketing, it's customer support, it's everything. Every touch point that your company has with the customer is part of their experience with you. And so I thought that also needs to be covered in the model, because every other framework out there only addresses the product, but not the experience. So I added experience element to the model. And not only customer facing, but also supplier facing, because we're looking at the gig economy now. It's getting bigger and bigger. You're working with freelancers and independent vendor suppliers. They should have a great experience. My cousin, or my brother-in-law is selling his own products on both Amazon.nl and Bol.com, which is the biggest Dutch online retailer. And he said, selling on Bol is a pure delight, he said. And Amazon sucks. It is pure agony being a supplier on the Amazon platform. So he doesn't want to sell on Amazon, basically, because for him as a vendor, it's a terrible experience. And on Bol, it's wonderful. That's the experience not on the customer side, that's experience on the vendor side. That is becoming increasingly important too. No, not a word about that in either safe or less or whatever model you have out there. So I have been inspired by organization design books that do cover these angles, team topologies, of course, the Spotify model, which is 10 years old already, but they had a few things right. Like they started with the tribe as the basically the beginning of things, because people uh, want a sense of belonging in an organization. They want a sense of recognition, of appreciation. The tribe gives you that. That's why we are tribal people. Basically, we want a thumb up from someone. So you did a great job. And in the other frameworks, the focus is on the product, not on the tribe. This aspect is not covered. It is missing, basically. So, well, long story short, I started with a new picture. I thought I need to start with the tribe. I call it the base, by the way. I use different terminology. And I use similar team types as in team topologies, but I also have a governance crew for management, because managers have to go somewhere. They're the ones buying coaches and consultants. They want to see themselves in the picture somewhere. You cannot just say, hey, there are no managers anymore. It makes no sense. And I add experience on the customer side and experience on the vendor side. And that basically has become a new picture. And the way it differs from the other pictures out there is that it's mostly descriptive and not prescriptive. I say it's a bit like Lego. You can make anything with it. They're just building blocks. You have different kinds of teams. You have different things, pieces that you can put together. I made a number of examples of what kind of organizational structures you could build with these building blocks. But hey, it's your Lego. You go and play with it. I like that analogy because people understand that Lego is not one size fits all. It's you can make small Lego things and you can make huge Lego things. It's up to you. But Lego does come with a few constraints. You can only put the building blocks together in certain ways. And the same with Unfixed, with my model. You can put the building blocks of the value stream crew and the platform crew and the experience crew. You can put them together in certain ways, but not in any random way. So it does send you in a certain direction of how you could build out your organization. And it is intended as a modeling tool. I hope to offer different versions of it on different platforms so that people can play with that. And it fits nicely together with team topologies. I got a really nice compliment from Anders Iversen, who was one of the two creators of the Spotify model. He said to me, well, basically, you fixed the problems that we had with the Spotify model uh, that we have found later. So that's a huge endorsement, of course, from him. And yeah, the feedback so far is really good. I'm very happy with the project so far.
Yeah, I really like listening to what you're saying there. There's a couple of things I picked up I'd like to dig a bit deeper. I like that you mentioned governance because, and as for those who listen to this and you yourself, you'll know that I'm high on the governance thing, right? So governing agility is one of those things that I've been talking about, eating, sleeping, breathing for the last 10 years. And with the remote agility framework, when we built that, we built the pillars of agile governance or remote governance into it, right? And making sure that we think about governance, but not thinking about governance in terms of your typical PMO and your project and those types of things, but how you govern the system of work in its entirety.
Exactly.
So, you know, those intrinsic pillars of governance, so, you know, the transparency and leadership and your actual patterns of work and the information that enables that. And I too often I see organizations don't think about that in the way that they've designed what they're doing, or it's just happened and then they've left that till too late, and then they wonder why it's all out of balance. So I really love that you've pulled that into the Unfixed framework.
Yeah, and that's basically my background with Management 3.0, of course, where I say manage the system, not the people. You are responsible, like the government in a country, they don't manage people. They set the constraints on the economy, on how people self-organize. And you have at a much smaller scale the same with a governance crew, as I call them, or a management team of a tribe or a base. They set the constraints on self-organization and then let things happen. And one thing that's basically the big difference between my Unfixed model and the Spotify model. I insist that there's no middle management. So you're not allowed to have managers anywhere else except in the governance crew. That's where they belong. That's where they stay. So there are no managers on the teams. There are no managers on the forums, as I call them, which is the chapters in Spotify model. That's the mistake they have made at the time with the Spotify model, that they made the chapter leads managers of
Yes.
people in their chapter. And the result of that is a matrix organization. And it's a pity because by that time in the organization design world, they had already figured out that matrix organizations don't work. They had already been judged as nice try, but this fails. And then the Spotify model came with zero input from the organization design world. They could have told you, hey, you shouldn't be doing that. Because, well, I have worked in a matrix organization in the past. It's just annoying, different managers and things escalating several layers up. That doesn't work. So I say managers only in the governance crew, nowhere else. Also with the specific intent that you want to keep things as flexible as possible. So the different crews, the teams, I call them crews in my model, they should remain flexible. The forums or the chapters, whatever you want to call them, they should remain flexible. And as soon as you put a manager somewhere, you have someone who is trying to protect their territory. And then you're stuck. That's why I call my model unfixed. I don't want anything to get stuck. You should be able to start new forums or destroy them, start new crews or destroy them in any way, keep things as flexible as you want, and keep the managers out from everything except in the governance crew, who have the very important responsibility to make this a successful base, a successful business unit, to have people not quit their jobs. So you could say their number one priority is to have everyone be happy in the base. And the number two priority is, well, probably they need a return on investment for the owners up there above. And the of course, the concerns for the customers and the suppliers, those are covered by the individual crews and the experience team, et cetera, et cetera. That is all delegated to the self-organizing crowd that you have in the crew. They should care about the other stakeholders that we are trying to offer value to. But the ones in the governance crew, the management team, they should be judged by how well people enjoy their work in that base, and are they collectively generating a return for those up above.
It sounds that you've also taken that piece. What I've seen for a very long time, but I still see it, is that the Spotify model has been propagated across many organizations in the hope that it would be the panacea. And the thing I've been saying to a lot of leaders lately is, why would you copy somebody else's model and put it in your model? Because then you bring their problems in, and then you have your problems and their problems, and now you've got a whole lot of problems. So why would you do that, right? And then secondly, around that, when they do Spotify themselves, without that contextual design and thinking about how you, as you say, unfix, you end up with all of these silos, which create all these chasms. We call, we call, say in remote AF, the silos become chasms if you don't address how you actually connect them. And I like the thought that you've had there in that unfixed model.
Yeah. So indeed, I try to break things down to patterns, basically individual building blocks. Like, it makes sense to have chapters or forums, as I call it, because people in a similar role want to talk about that role across multiple teams. It's just a bad thing to assign a manager to that little community. You want a moderator, someone to moderate the conversation, like you have a moderator of a meetup, or the organizers behind it, but they're not the managers of anyone. They just organize stuff. They facilitate the discussion. That's what you want. That's a very useful pattern that you see in many companies. So I adopted that. And the same with the value stream oriented crews, of course, and the platform crews, which is a very well-known concept, which is, by the way, not addressed in LESS, and also not really addressed in SAFe either, but it is in team topologies. They recognize the need for a platform crew. So I adopted that as well. So I borrowed from multiple sources, but also from organization design, where they came up with, for example, the criticism about the Agile communities, that you have a number of these product delivering units, Agile product groups or product teams, and they all have direct contact with the customer, but that results in sub-optimization for those individual things that being offered, and sometimes with actual competition between those teams, and territorial behavior and infighting. So they recognize the need in organization design to have something covering that, and say, look, we have customers, they ask for a solution of which we have a couple of products that fit that solution. Think Microsoft. I mean, they came up with Microsoft Office. People didn't only want Excel or Word or PowerPoint. They wanted something that was integrated. There were multiple business units behind it. But Microsoft had to solve this. So look, we're going to offer one interface because it's one experience to the customer. And that's why you need an experience-oriented crew that says, look, we have all these touch points in the business, lots of different teams talking directly with the customer, which is a good thing. But we're going to check on what they're doing and make sure that the entire experience from the customer's perspective is cohesive, and they don't see different teams fighting with each other or refusing to collaborate. That's their responsibility. So I borrowed that from organization design, not from the Agile community. So there's good patterns in there, in my opinion. Is Lego blocks. You play with it. You build your own organization. Is it a framework or not? I leave that question open. Is Lego a framework? Maybe at small scale, the Lego blocks, they are like tiny little framework because you only can put them together in a certain way, but then you have total freedom in what you build with it. So I leave that decision, that judgment to other people. Yeah, it allows you to create your own pictures that could compete with less and safe and the Spotify model and whatnot.
That's brilliant. Look, we're pretty much getting close to the end of our time to this evening or this morning or this afternoon in your area. I think the important thing here now is to allow people to understand how they can get involved. So it's what I call at the end of every interview is the gratuitous plug time. How can people get involved? How can they get in touch with you? Particularly the unfixed thing. How can we get to understand more about that?
Sure. So there's a website, unfixed.work. Very easy. Go there. I just launched the community a couple of days ago. We have a few hundred people already signed up. But what we're now looking at, of course, is case studies, examples. I'm already talking with a couple of people, number of organizations. I just had a conversation earlier today of a company doing very similar things with dynamic teams, as I am advocating as well. So this is probably going to become a case study. And I'm reviewing a case study of another company that's nearly finished. So people want examples of how can you use this modeling tool and how does that compare with what we are doing? How is it different? What can we learn from that as an organization? And also, how should the tool evolve? Because I now have version 1, and I'm sure things will change. There will be new building blocks, new Lego blocks added in the future, I'm pretty sure, that you could connect to the existing building blocks. But I need that input from people on what are you doing, what has been successful for you in your organization design that you see as a pattern that we could adopt in this modeling language. And so I look forward to having that conversation. Come to unfix.work and sign up and come and talk.
That's fantastic. Well, we're at the end of our time. I'd like to thank you for spending the time with us on all the remote things today, and look forward to talking to you again soon and hearing how Unfixed has really gone well.
Thanks for the invite, Tony. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about it.
Absolute pleasure.